everybody, and welcome to Property People. Today I am very pleased to be joined with Mr. Martin Rapley. Martin has a long and illustrious career in property, specifically in building, contracting, project management, spanning 30 years. Is that right, Martin?
Yeah, I think it's probably over 30 years now, actually. I say over 30 years, but it's getting scarily near 40.
You don't look it.
I started by building sandcastles when I was in short trousers, so that's what I count.
Well, I mean, your experience and your level of knowledge is amazing, because we've actually worked together in the past. And having spent many years as a builder, you've now moved towards project management for clients, landlords, developers on their construction projects, refurbs of all shapes and sizes. Always a good place to start. How did it all start for you? How did you get into property? How did you get into construction? And we'll go from there.
Yeah. Okay. So construction actually started when I was given a summer holiday job with my uncle's construction company. So I'd done O levels at school and had kind of 8 weeks off for the summer, and he offered me a job. And some of that work was manual work, labouring out on site, and in those days, of course, I was in charge of sweeping up and making the tea. But a lot of that work was also in the office, and I started meeting the other technical staff that were in the office. And I went back to school that following summer to start A levels, knowing full well I wanted to work in the construction industry, but absolutely adamant that I was going to be management rather than on the tools.
Right.
I was, maths was my strong subject, so it became obvious that I was going to, drift towards the financial side of the management of construction, and so that led me towards kind of quantity surveying, and then I had two options. I could work for a professional quantity surveying practice, an RICS practice, or I could work for building contractors. And although I got offered jobs for both, building contractors just felt much more exciting. It felt as though I was in the thick of things nigh on from day one. Whereas the professional way, I was going to be, I was going to be in the office and not get the cut and thrust. So that was it. Left school after A levels, and instead of going off and doing a degree, went off and joined construction. Worked for a building contractor as a quantity surveyor, so the guy that looks after the finances. I mean, in reality, I was the junior, but was out on site. I'd been working in the office within a week, and I'd gone out to site twice. I'd been on building sites, and that was it. I'd found what I wanted to do, and the career kind of carried on, mostly financially orientated. Changed companies a few times, and then ended up working with a company where they embraced everything in one umbrella. In fact, they called us estimator surveyor managers. And I'd done quite a bit of estimating in the past, hadn't done a lot of management, so it was a good step forwards. I got to number 2 in that company. There was the managing director and then myself. And what I found was the projects that really excited me were actually the ones that needed more brain power, the ones that needed some thinking and planning. We would pick up works in live museums. And the work itself, the project might not have been overly complicated, but the logistics of working in a live museum with the public and restrictions on noise and restrictions on access and all the other things, that's what made the jobs exciting for me. So I really gravitated towards these complicated things. But during the last recession, 2008, 2009, the business I worked for wasn't going anywhere. We were bumbling along. I was still employed. We still had work coming in. But of course, we were doing everything on a shoestring. It was starting to lose its appeal. And I'd always had a kind of discussion with the MD that I would buy him out. And he told me one day that his youngest daughter had just gone to university. And as a result, he was going to not sell the business for another 3 years. He needed to have the business to fund her through university. And that was it. I kind of thought, well, we're bumbling on, we're going nowhere. Time to leave. So literally handed him a notice in and set up a complete clone of the company that I'd come out of overnight with one massive change. The principal change I wanted to make was the business I ran had to be able to work remotely. We found ourselves tied to an office. We were in Orpington, and nothing totally worked without being in the office and running through things through the office computer system and the office management system that only worked in the office. And we weren't really, these were the early days of smartphones, but they weren't able to get us access to emails on smartphones, and it just wasn't right for me. So my desire was to use more tech to move it forward. But what I'd failed to realise was that a lot of the contracts we were winning at the time needed more experience than I could justify on my own. Even though I'd got the experience, a newly set up company wasn't going to get on the tender list for instance, the Victoria and Albert Museum. They wanted to see trading history.
Sure.
So I was at a networking event and saying to a guy about how I'd not appreciated quite how hard it was going to be to get work. I was getting a lot of work for members of the public, really, and a few property investors. And this guy said, well, why don't you go to this property investing meet? There's one up in Chatham. I've got. I think he gave me a code to get in for free or something like that.
That's it.
He said, go along to it, and he said, you'll be able to stand up and introduce yourself. And that's exactly what I did. Went along, did the usual introduction, the way these things work, and
you get 20 seconds, right?
Yeah, that was it. Yeah. So although I'm involved with PIN now, that wasn't a PIN meeting. That was an independent meeting in those days. But it was literally, get in the queue, go to the front, and I honed my piece. And of course, very quickly, I had property investors wanting to show me refurbishment and development projects. And then it was like this real surreal thing started to happen, because what I started meeting were property investors that in my mind hadn't actually got a clue what they were doing. I didn't realise that property investors had learned loads of things about buying property smartly and negotiating deals, things that I didn't know about in those days, lease options and things like that.
Yeah.
But they didn't seem to understand how to refurbish and convert. And I was meeting people that were saying, I'm just going to build this extension on the back of the house. And I was saying, well, have you got planning permission? And they said, oh, it doesn't need planning permission, it's permitted development. And I'd say, no, that extension that's already built is permitted development. You can't have another 3 meters on the back. And I said, oh, I hadn't realised I'd got to wait for that. And they'd have to give me scatty planning drawings. And I'd say, where's the detail? Where's the structural engineer's design? Oh, do we need structural engineers tonight? Do we need building control drawings? And it was like, oh my word. And at the time it was like, I've got two options. I either persevere with this construction business, or I actually go down the route of becoming a consultant for all of these people that I could see. In my mind, they were getting their wallet out of their back pocket and emptying all the money straight down a big black hole. And there was a black hole that I knew how to plug up very easily. But in turn, they knew loads of things I didn't know. And so that kind of led me. And I went along to a one-day introduction to property course, one of the PIN courses, to find out what people were taught on property courses about refurbishment. And of course, in a one-day course, not a thing came out. We decided, I'd taken Sarah, my wife, along, and we decided that she could probably get out of her administration accounts job through property. And so we went on and did a 3-day course, and I think a bit of refurbishment came up, right at the end of one day, and it was like, right, there definitely is a hole here, because no one's teaching this, no one's doing this, no one's helping.
They're all focusing on finding deals and funding deals, but actually how to get through it, especially with a value add through a construction process.
Yeah, and I hadn't realised that. In fact, very early on, I'd met Simon Zucchi. And I didn't know who he was at the time. I went to what became the very first Kent PIN, and I just went along as a punter, met this fella there, got talking to him, and he said, well, what do you do? And I said, I've got construction background, and this is what I do. He said, you will be a brilliant property investor. You have got all of the knowledge that none of the property investors have got. And I'm thinking, what knowledge have I got? What do I actually know that's different to them? Because I just hadn't realised that everything I'd learned over 28 years by then was not the normal within property investing, because I hadn't realised that property investors, as you say, aren't really taught that what for me is fairly fundamental. So I plugged up my knowledge with property investing knowledge and learned what property investors were and how to be a property investor. And we'd had a property by then, and we've had a property nearly 20 years, but only one, and we hadn't really thought about growing a portfolio. And since then, we've grown our own portfolio and bolted knowledge of being property investors to knowledge of construction together to offer this not quite bespoke service, because there's a few other people doing similar things, but there's not many people doing close to what I'm doing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. When I was looking around for help on a particular project, there was only a handful, and your name had come up a few times as highly recommended, and you got a good track record. And once we started speaking, it was quite obvious that you knew a lot about building and construction and the project management process, and that was what I was looking for. I mean, in terms of going from a builder to becoming a project manager, how did you find that transition? Was that easy? Was that has that been better for you?
I suppose it's been way more flexible and more. I think the days end up being more planned as a consultant, because as a builder, although I wasn't building, I was managing teams. There are always challenges coming up. Right. So it was constantly on the phone to one site, solving a challenge, jump in the car, go to another site, solve a challenge. The materials didn't turn up. The wrong things have arrived. We didn't get enough quantity, all of those kinds of things that go on. And as the manager of the business, it would end up back with me. And, and I got to a point where, I was pretty much busy all day. And then in the evenings, I'd be sitting on the internet buying materials online. I hadn't got the time to be buying materials during the day. So I was ordering things online for deliveries, but with the usual things that, bits went wrong. Accidentally I'd order all the materials and send it to the wrong site. So because I was just in constant chase and rush. Whereas as a consultant, there's much more time to consider what's going on. There's still the usual rush around. There's still the usual bit where a contractor does something and, I've opened it up and it's not what anyone expected and we need to come down and make a decision. But it's not constant. There's a lot more planning. Project management is a process. So what I didn't know as a builder, I didn't really know the process before we got a tender document to price. I'd never got involved with planning applications. I hadn't got involved with initial budgets. I hadn't got involved with the process of getting the design sorted out. And so I got all of that by working with a developer, initially full-time, and then later on a consultancy basis. In fact, developer I'm still working with as a consultant, and kind of used him to plug up my knowledge. So he drained me of my knowledge of running building projects, and I drained him of his knowledge about getting the design and getting the planning and getting everything set up front. So
and that's the relationship you have at the moment is with. You do joint ventures yourself for your own projects?
So we've done a couple of joint ventures, but at the moment, everything we're doing is either as consultants or in our own projects in our own right. So I haven't got any joint ventures on the go at the moment. It's a usual thing, go off, do some property training. Everyone says do joint ventures. So we did, learn from that. And have kind of now, in fact, the rule I always say to everyone about me doing a joint venture is I will not do a joint venture with anyone I haven't worked as a consultant for. Because then we work together in a professional relationship and we can get to the end of it and we can say, right, did that work? Could we work together on the same basis in a joint venture partnership? Rather than, kind of the joint ventures we did before, but they were people we met networking. They were people that we met through, acquaintances, that kind of thing. But you don't actually know how someone works until you have to work with them. And if you've lined up a joint venture agreement, that could be too late. And certainly we did a joint venture with a couple very early on who, wanted to step all over our skills and what we brought to the table, and wouldn't actually trust a lot of what I was doing. And I look back now, and it's like a lot of the problems we've got on that project, even now, and it's not that it's a project any longer, we've got flats and house that we rent out. But a lot of the reasons that hasn't gone as well is because they didn't actually trust me. But in turn, I probably wasn't strong enough with them that I did know what I was doing on the construction side. Whereas if we'd have done that as a straight consultancy, we'd have got to the end, we would have got the job done without any doubt. You know, probably a little bit of cursing behind each other's backs. But we would have all moved on and said, okay, great, we've got to the end of the project, but we're not going to do another one together.
Because that's how a lot of these projects go. And as a good project manager, it's all about just getting to the finish line. Sometimes it's not necessarily a pretty win, but it's something. The win is important nonetheless, and getting there amicably. Because if the worst case scenario, the worst situation is that everybody falls out, tools get dropped down, and everybody's kind of left on the ledge. And whatever you do, you've got to avoid that.
Yeah, if you lose your builder, you are really on the back foot, because it's really hard to find a new builder. Even if you've only paid the builder for what you've done, any builder coming in is always going to charge a premium to finish the project off. There is always a time lag in there. So, yeah, and I always say I'm managing with an arm round the shoulder. Yeah, I'm nudging this builder along the way. No matter how poor they might be, we've got to nudge them over the line, because the property is worth nothing for an investor until they can move tenants into it or sell it. I've had some investors that have almost set off to fall out with builders, and I've had investors that have come to me and they've said, "Oh, I can't work with this builder anymore. He's been there a fortnight and I don't like him." And it's like, you've got to, because you've just got to call it a bad job, accept it for the next 8-10 weeks or so, and get rid of it, because it's going to cost you way, way more in the long term.
And in terms of the variance of types of projects that you're doing at the moment, I think you've got quite an interesting one as well in the church at the moment. But like, is it anything from extensions up to? Give us a range of the stuff that you're working on or have worked on.
Yeah, so the smaller end of things tend to be HMO related. So sometimes with extensions, loft conversions, and they're typically for property investors that have got other businesses, much like yourself, that haven't got the time to be there on a regular basis, or property investors that have done it and realised they hated it. So they've done one or two in the past and realised they don't want to do any more. And then as we go up to the bigger schemes, I get involved with smaller developers. So I've got in the wings ready to start as soon as we're able to work again, is the conversion of, is a commercial building that's being converted into 12 flats. Now, actually, I've been brought on halfway through that. The contractor has gone into liquidation or gone into administration.
Really?
Because he didn't know what he was doing. The developer didn't know what he was doing. And has basically he's gone out looking for finance, and the broker has put him in touch with me to kind of help him get it back out of administration. So we've got his company out of administration with a managed scheme to get all the way through. And in fact, we've got a builder ready to start the project and finish this off. So that's kind of the higher end. I do little house builds as well. Yeah, I've got 5 houses lined up, ready to start. Probably later this year or so. As with all of these, there's always a bit of planning stuck somewhere or a bit of finance that hasn't come through. So things take a lot longer than they should do. And then, as you say, I've got this church, which is outside of property investing circles, but ticks a lot of boxes for me because the client there is not experienced. So, which is very often the case with property investors. They're not really experienced. And these are just members of the church that have found all of the tradesmen they need to refurbish their church into effectively a modern auditorium so that they can rent the space out for the community with sound and lighting and IT tech and better acoustics and modern colours and all of that. And they've literally come to me and said, we've got all these guys, but we've got no idea who to bring in when, how to manage it, how to manage the connection between the trades. And in fact, they hadn't got any drawings or anything. One of the early things we did was actually get all of their ideas on drawings because it was just loads of ideas that were hanging around in their head. So a lot of similarities with property investing, but not quite property investing. But for me, project management is a process. And the process is the same, no matter what the building is, what the end client is. You know, it's the process is, do we understand what we've got to achieve? Do we understand the parameters we're working around? Time limits, costs parameters. And that doesn't matter, you know, what the project is at all. So, you know, it's all.
So you've always got a structure of the things that you're looking for, a start, a middle, and end at different stages of the project, and that structure is replicable, is transferable to any single project, whether it's a commercial project or whether it's somebody doing something, a vanity project for themselves. It's always a similar system.
That's right, yeah. And I say to people that the type of building isn't relevant. People phone me and say, Martin, have you got any experience converting a church into flats? Well, as it happens, I have, but that's not relevant because the process is still the same thing. The process is about appointing the right people. Now, if I've had a listed church to convert that, I would want to appoint an architect that has done that kind of project before, rather than perhaps the regular architect we'd use if we wanted drawings to convert a house into an HMO. So it's about appointing the right people for the project with the right skills that can manage it through, and then create the team in the right way. And likewise with a builder, you wouldn't necessarily want the main street white van man builder to do a listed building project. I would want the builder that had experience in listed building. But the process is appoint the right builder, manage the right builder. And that's why, it doesn't really matter what we do. By the way, I've worked in every kind of building except prisons and hotels. I've done work in else, but I've never been in a prison, and I've actually, oddly enough, never worked in a hotel. I'll keep away from prisons. I'm quite happy with it, missing that one out, but maybe one day I'll do something in a hotel.
Yeah, hotel's a good place to be. Service accommodation is taking a bit of a hit at the moment. Do you work with many service? Well, you've never done it at a hotel, but kind of apart hotels are becoming a big thing.
Yeah, I've done service accommodation. In fact, I've not really managed service accommodation. I've given a lot of advice for investors doing service accommodation, because mostly that's quite that frequent. That's just about a tidy up of an existing property. Sometimes I've given them a bit of help with extensions and things like that to do service accommodation. So I actually haven't managed anything in service accommodation myself, but I think that's primarily because at the moment they're either very small vanilla schemes with not a lot more than good decoration and good furniture and good management. And none of the clients I've met recently have been doing these smaller apart hotel type things. So it will come along at some point, and it doesn't bother me because, again, it's process. What do we need to do? And it's about understanding that the fixtures and fittings are possibly not the same as an HMO. We want different styles, but it's about asking those questions. What do we need? Making sure we all understand it and we're delivering what the client is expecting.
So one of the most common questions that comes up that I get asked, and I'm sure that you get asked as well, which is, I mean, how do you get a builder to not pull the wool over your eyes, or better, how do you find the best builder? What's the best way to go about it?
Yeah. So the first thing is, because I've got so much experience, I can smell these builders that are going to pull the wool over my eyes. So they don't even get on site. Which isn't obviously so easy for property investors that haven't got that experience. The way I always look to appoint builders is it's got to come down to relationship, because whatever you're doing, you are going to work with this builder for the next, whatever it is, 10, 12, 20 weeks, or however big your project is. And if you're running a business, you would never take on a member of staff, no matter how good their CV is, if you didn't think you could work with them, didn't think you could share an office with them, go out for a sandwich with them. And it's exactly the same with a builder. Too many people, for me, are looking to appoint the cheapest builder. And you actually need to appoint the best builder. And that comes down through doing due diligence. Some of that due diligence is obvious, like taking references and looking at other projects they're doing. But some of that due diligence is nothing more than making sure you can work with them. So if I'm engaging with contractors, and I arrange to meet some contractors at a project to show them around, and I say, turn up at 10 o'clock. If the guy turns up at 10:30, that's already one little negative for me. If he turns up, if he texts me at 5 to 10 saying I'm stuck in traffic, these things happen. But someone who turns up late or someone who forgets. So my measure of what is a good contractor is actually in reverse. I look for the contractors I don't want to work with and eliminate them from further progress. So on bigger projects, I'll send out a questionnaire to the contractors, looking for their background, their turnover, their directors, their health and safety experience, their in-house training. A lot of those questions are only questions for question's sake. They're actually designed to see who can actually fill out a questionnaire and return it to me by the closing date. Because if you can't, then how can you possibly prove to me that you can complete a building project by the closing date, the completion date we agree?
Makes total sense.
So I'll often start off with, on bigger projects. In fact, I had a bigger project a couple of years ago. We started off with 12 contractors, but we only tendered it out to 5. 7 of them were eliminated because they couldn't prove they could do the right job. I mean, this was a project about £1 million, and we had contractors saying, our current turnover is £500,000. And we're thinking, well, then why are you even applying for this project? It's clearly far too big for you.
So that's interesting. You said you'd sent out tender packs to 10 different builders.
No, sent out initial inquiries.
Okay.
So I ran an initial. I think we would have done an ad, probably a bit locally. Who do we know? Who does the client know? Who's on Facebook? Those kinds of things, and got 12 people. So that would have
12
said
inquiries.
We're converting this to this. The approximate cost is this. This is what we're expecting. Let us know if you're interested. And 12 looked interesting, got down to 5 that we want to price. But interestingly, there was one contractor that had shone all the way through. I'd sent him an inquiry, he'd phoned me up. Good to speak to you, Martin. Thanks for sending it through, confirming it'll be me dealing with it, you'll get it back. 2 days later, just confirming you got it back. And he knows that he needs to touch base with me. I wanted to invite you round to see a project we've just done, finishing around the corner. Can I meet up with you? I've got these photos. I'd like to send you these. And this guy had shone all the way through. He'd turned up on time for the meeting to view it. He knew what the project was about, because a lot of builders turn up, particularly on smaller jobs, and they say, right, so what are we building here then? It's like, well, you've had the details a week. That's not my job. You're supposed to know. So when these guys start shining, you start to find, actually, I don't want to work with those people, rather than focusing solely on price. Yes, price is important, but it doesn't matter how cheap someone is. If they're the wrong builder for you and the relationship isn't formed and they can't do the job, then you will end up spending way more in the longer term than perhaps that slightly pricier contractor that has proved to you all along they're capable of doing the job and delivering what you need.
So it's about having a good volume of inquiries and people that you can speak to initially, and then it's a process of elimination by putting a few hoops that they can jump through, making sure they arrive on a site visit on time, making sure that they can fill out a questionnaire with their track record, with a few details about how they run their business, how many projects they've got on the go, how big is their team, that kind of thing. And then you can see, okay, the ones that are obviously not going to work. And then they say, okay, we've shortlisted maybe 2 or 3 that we really like. And out of these, who's the one that we feel most comfortable with for X, Y, and Z reason?
That's it. So look for reasons to eliminate. I'll tell you another good thing I use to eliminate. If I send them the tender documents and then meet them on site a week later, those builders that walk all the way around and say, oh, can I come back next week with my electrician? Well, hold on. How come you didn't know you needed your electrician for this appointment? And sometimes I'll point them towards that. If I know there's some complicated things, I might say it would be worth you bringing your electrician, your plumber, if it's that complex. But there's another negative, and it's one less tick in the box. So that if 2 prices are coming up pretty close, and the guy who messed me around and made me go back to site a second time to meet his electrician is in the running, he may end up losing it just because he couldn't prove to me well enough that he was on top of things.
Now, there is one thing to be said as well, though. Builders do get a lot of flack, and I've found that sometimes the client is actually at fault because they haven't provided with the right information at the right time. So, for example, that builder might come and say, well, I didn't have what I needed to know that I needed an electrician. So I've come along, you've kind of almost wasted my time, and that might get their back up. That might put the price up on you automatically because they think, well, this client's going to be hard work. So what things could investors or clients do hiring a builder to make sure that they get the best, most efficient use out of that builder and their time?
The one document that they need to give the builder is some kind of schedule of works, because it's all right giving the builder the drawings. Yeah, we're going to build an extension on the back of the property. They're the technical drawings that tell them, the builder, how to build. You know, the kinds of bricks to use, the thickness of insulation, and all of the technical stuff related to building regulations. But there's still all of the information relating to fitting out this property. Yeah, what kind of kitchen are we going to put in there? What kind of bathrooms do we need? Are we going to, are we going to use tiles on the wall of the bathrooms? Are we going to put laminate floors down, carpet, vinyl, all of those things. And if you can give all of that information to your builder, as well as the drawings, and try and summarize that into some kind of document that allows them to price everything, then you'll get credibility from builders. And you're absolutely right. A lot of people say there's loads of bad builders out there. As with everything, there are unfortunately a few bad builders. But I have to say, there's some bad builders because they had bad clients who allowed it to fail or didn't help them understand that, what they were wanting. And in fact, this goes back to when I was still running a building firm. I had a guy meet me once at a property, and he's saying, right, so I want to convert this into an HMO. Now, this is 2000 and whatever it's 12. HMOs are relatively new. I was a builder. I didn't know what an HMO was. I didn't know what the HMO regulations were, which back then were nowhere near as onerous as they are now. The property investor didn't tell me, right, so for an HMO, I want an ensuite in every single bedroom. I need to have a fire alarm. I need to get this amount of kitchen. Didn't tell me that. So had I won that job, there's another story on why I didn't win the job, but had I won the job, I may well not have produced for him what he was expecting, because he actually hadn't told me what he was expecting. So,
interesting.
And the reason I didn't win the job, I put the price in, it was about £60,000, and he came back to me and he said, I've only got about £30,000 in the budget. I said, we can't do all of this. I might be a bit on the high side, but I'm not £30,000 high.
Yeah.
I said, where did £30,000 come from? He said, that's all that's left between what it's worth when it's finished and what I bought it for. And my brain says, well, you paid too much to buy it, didn't you? Don't squeeze the builder in the middle.
Jesus Christ, that's never going to work.
Or don't buy that property, buy another one. So anyway, the property is still there. Someone did convert it, and it is still running as an HMO. I do drive past it every now and again, but it wasn't me that did the work there.
Maybe did it himself to keep his costs down.
Well, yeah, and that's what happens. They end up cutting corners, doing it themselves, trying to manage it themselves, buying in the cheap builder, buying the cheap products, and then things backfire and cause problems later on.
I'm a true believer that in life, that if you go cheap, it ends up costing you more. Sometimes that's more true than in other instances. But I truly believe that in building and builder work, the cheaper you go, it ends up costing you a hell of a lot more. And I think that's
absolutely
from experience.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And when we were contracting, when I was managing contracting projects, we were always employing tradesmen. That was one of my roles, was to find the tradesmen all of the time. And it got to a point where we would frequently discount the cheapest price we got in. Because it was out of hand. Just get rid of them, particularly if they were someone we didn't know. It was like, let's just get rid of them because they're likely to cause us some problems along the way. And particularly the kind of environments we were working in, we couldn't afford to take on a contractor that was going to cause us problems, because the knock-on effects, the ramifications were sometimes quite significant in some of the buildings we were in. So we would always pay for safety, as it were.
Good, good. Okay, so my next question really is about I guess this is a two-tiered question, because what we saw just over 4 weeks ago might be slightly different to what we see today with the COVID-19. But in terms of the biggest problems that the building industry is facing, we've got to build something like 300,000 new homes every year. The skills shortages, materials. I mean, right now I know that getting materials on site is quite tricky, and you do a lot of Facebook Lives on your Facebook profile, and you've been talking to investors and developers up and down the country about how they can manage to continue their projects through this period. But if I could just go 4 weeks before that, before we talk about what's going on today and what you're seeing, what is the biggest obstacle and difficulty and problem that the building industry and builders are facing right now, in your opinion, and that's stopping us getting the amount of housing that we need built?
I don't think there's one particular thing. I think there are a number of challenges. If we start at the very front end, there is a shortage of good opportunities, good sites in good areas. One of the challenges in the northern part of the country, for instance, is you get to a point where the cost per square metre to build a house is not much less than the cost per square metre that you'll sell the house for. So the margin in the middle just doesn't work, which is why, unless you're one of the big volume developers that can really screw the prices down, and have probably land banked property or vacant sites for years, it's really hard to build. So it's all right saying, we as a country have got to generate however many new properties a year, but there's large chunks of the country it's not economical to build. And people even now show me sites where, even if they were given the site for free, they couldn't make a profit out of the build, because it's just not a part of the country that justifies that. So there's a problem there. There's definitely a problem with the planning process, because that is a very slow, laborious process on anything that's slightly large, anything that's slightly contentious, with all of the not in my backyard type attitudes of people, and the infrastructure can't cope. So that slows everything down at that point as well. I think financing, some people might say financing is a problem, but for me, financing isn't so much the problem, because I think financing is there if you've got a viable scheme. You've got to go out and get it, and you've got to work on it. Some would say financing is a problem. For me, I would say you didn't have a viable scheme in the first place. So don't use.
I would agree with that. Working with the development finance fund myself, it's rarely the funds to be deployed that are the issue. It's how the opportunity is presented is usually the catch there.
Absolutely. And then you kind of get to the point where we start building, and although there are a lot of builders and tradesmen in the country, when it comes down to it, there's an awful lot of building work going on at the moment, particularly pre-coronavirus. There was, you walk up any street and residential homeowners were doing loft conversions, extensions on the back of the house, on the side of the house, remodeling. So, there was a huge amount of work going on in the private sector, which sucked people out of what we might call the small developer property investor sector. So there was a shortage of tradesmen there. And I was talking to people that were saying that, their preferred builder, they were booking 4, 5, 6 months in advance to make sure they were available for the projects they wanted them to do. I was talking to people that were saying, I can't use my preferred builder because he's too busy and I've got to find new. So, we were getting to that point. And unfortunately, what's going to happen now is there are going to be some builders that wind up their businesses and are not going to continue because their business isn't sustainable at this time, or even their wife has got a business that's doing for argument's sake takeaway pies, and now everyone wants takeaway pies. So the guy that was running a building business last week is now out delivering takeaway pies And by the way, he might as well stay doing that when we come out of this and not bother going back to the building business, because it's far easier, working business. So we're going to lose builders out of the construction industry, and possibly an element of foreign nationals going home as well to some extent with Brexit and some difficulties with that. So we're going to end up with a reduced labour force, which is in the first place. Now, are the jobs going to restart straight away? Some will, but some will clearly not continue. Some projects will go on the back burner, and some deals are going to be found not to be financially viable coming out of this. So I think we'll still be busy. But I think the answer to the question is there's a number of things that are stopping us building as many houses as we should do, and that will continue.
So what about things like 3D printing? I don't know how much you know about kind of these or SIP panels and modular builds and light gauge steel construction. In terms of how it was to build back 20, 30 years ago compared to today, is there technology that can propel us forward, that can advance us? I mean, would you think that's going in a positive direction?
Yeah, without any doubt. Let's park 3D printing because that's a slightly different thing. But those modular off-site builds you're referring to, they've been around they've been around for decades, but they've started to get prolific in the last 10 years. Initially starting with timber framed and those kinds of things, but moving into light gauge steel and the other things you're talking about there. What we haven't got at the moment is the volume of factory space to generate these products. So yes, they work. By the way, they're no cheaper and generally a little bit more expensive than traditional build. A lot of people ask me if they're cheaper. They are definitely not cheaper. They can be quicker to build. So you make your savings by not financing a project for quite as long. But I was talking to someone the other day and they're saying the issue you get with these offsites is they say the manufacture period is only 12 weeks, but because they've only got a certain volume they can put through their factories, there is a 6-week waiting list. Right. So in theory, it's an 18-week process, which is pretty much back with traditional. So because of these factory built systems are taking off, but not as fast as we would like. And clearly, as they take off and they develop, we'll see the economies of scale and the prices will start to drop, and they'll start to get more comparable with traditional build. And of course, the volume will allow them to genuinely turn things around in 12 weeks, and perhaps in the longer term, 10 weeks or less, as they get their processes set up better. When it comes to 3D printing, I've not looked into 3D printing as far as buildings in the UK go. I think that's a long way away at the moment. That's something that clearly works for new build only. It doesn't work for conversions and refurbishments, but could work for new build. But I think the first thing we'll see with 3D printing in construction is we will find the structure built from 3D processes, but then traditional cladding or curtain walling going on the outside of it, these SIP panels and things like that on the outside of it. So it won't be 100% 3D printed. It will be a hybrid type solution that will speed things along. But it's difficult to say because technology is just growing exponentially, but I don't see 3D printing in mainstream building for a good couple of years yet. Whereas I think the modular, the off-site build, the factory build will definitely start to speed up. And you look at where we are now. In theory, factories are closed because we can't have operatives working within 2 meters. So factories are closed down. What if your factory is 100% robot operated and controlled? and the only person that needs to go in is the person who goes in and flicks the switch in the morning, kind of thing.
That's
Now,
great.
some houses are being generated. We're all on lockdown, but there's factory generating houses remotely, and that's the kind of thing that actually could easily, could start to come out of this current.
That's a really good point. I think, and that was my next point, is kind of talking about current affairs. How is this whole COVID-19 going to change the way that we do things? We were having a very brief chat about it just before we started recording, and things like you mentioned, more automation in factories is probably going to be on people's minds, about cutting labor force as well. Why hire people when we can use robots to carry things from one machine to the next? Light gauge steel would be great for that kind of thing, I guess. But also, right now, where we are now, I know you've been putting out a lot of hints and tips as to how people can survive in lockdown. So what have you been seeing? Because I know that you've actually just started a project in this period as well. So
yeah,
and you've been helping a lot of investors. So yeah, give us a little bit of background on all of that.
So this all, we had the instruction to lock down, as it were, 23rd, 24th of March, whatever that date was, which was, and you should only go to work if you can't work from home. Now, so that immediately led to a grey area, because building contractors were saying, well, I can't build someone else's project from my house, therefore I feel as though I'm allowed to go to work. So because of that grey area, actually the government wrote to the Construction Leadership Council, which is a council of kind of all of the heads of all of the federations relating to construction, and said that, in fact, the first bit was very much, thank you very much to your members for supporting us with immediate needs. Thinking of these Nightingale hospitals and things like that, of course, and continuing to maintain infrastructure and what have you. And by the way, we are happy for construction projects to continue, subject to compliance with a new code of practice. So that code of practice was released, which, to be honest, was all common sense. Simple things like, we would advise you not to travel to site in a van together. Come under your own steam. We would recommend you don't use public transport. By the way, site owners, you may need to find some more parking facilities. Make sure that no one's within 2 meters of each other, so you may not be able to have quite as many guys on site as you would have done. Make sure that when you're having breaks, you're not all crammed into a tiny little room, breathing over each other. Make sure you've got additional cleanliness. So all common sense stuff. Yeah. Which was a really good thing, because the building contractors were saying, great, now we've got some clarity. Yes, the jobs are going to slow down and there's going to be some impact, but at least we're building, at least we're doing things. However, part of the Construction Leadership Council, the Federation of Builders Merchants, said, we don't feel that we can operate in a safe way. We can't comply with these restrictions in our builders merchants, so we're going to close down, apart from the supply of materials for an emergency or for infrastructure. Yeah. So we suddenly had this massive conflict. We had loads of builders that were told they could work, albeit they couldn't work in private houses and there were restrictions. And then we had loads of builders merchants that said, oh, by the way, we're not going to supply you any materials. So we've ended up with this massive conflict of, and getting to a point where materials are getting scarce. There are builders merchants operating because they're not in the federation. There are companies that have always been operating online that are still supplying. But because the volume merchants aren't operating, the smaller merchants are running out of materials. Because the volume merchants aren't operating, the truck drivers that would normally do multiple deliveries aren't doing the multiple deliveries. So we are getting to a point where things are slowing down again.
I think they're making an announcement actually at some point today about when the next target date is to ease the lockdown controls. In terms of, I mean, there's only so long that we can continue like this before things really start to get tricky with those supply chains. Have you got any gauge on speaking to any merchants or any developers on when that might be? Is it the end of April? Is it the end of the May when things start to get worrying? Or
So I was talking to a contractor yesterday, and he was saying that he wanted to buy 12 bags of 12 bags of plaster, and he'd been to 3 different merchants before he got his 12. So he's saying plaster, that was in Kent, and that was in his part of Kent. Now, he might have gone in the opposite direction and found them quicker, but that was his experience. And in fact, the last bags of plaster came from a plant hire company that someone told him, had bought a pallet load to do something and had a few spare. So,
Right.
So things like that are very short. I'm hearing that timber is available from the online suppliers, but I'm not, at the moment, there's nowhere that we can find that are supplying kitchens, for instance. So, some of your finishing things are struggling. There's no clarity at the moment as to when things are going to open. Interestingly, the government released, or the Construction Leadership Council released another code of practice yesterday that actually restricted some of the restrictions on the previous code of practice.
Yeah.
Significantly, they said operatives can be within 2 meters of each other, but shouldn't be facing each other. And if they are near each other, they should only be near each other for no more than 15 minutes. Wow. So they've kind of started, so effectively 2 people could unload lengths of timber, and one walking behind the other carrying these lengths of timber, is what they're saying. I think there's going to start to be some pressure on some of these merchants. I did read, and I haven't done much research in this, but I did read that LMPG had negotiated to open up some Magnet branches and some Johnson's Paint branches. So it could be that things are starting to open up, but I think when they do open up, we won't see the trade counters open. I think we'll predominantly see internet and telephone orders only, probably for designated collection times or delivery only, which is fine for the well-organised builders, but unfortunately there's still a lot of builders who run out of a box of screws and jump in the van and go and buy another one. And they're the builders that are going to struggle at the moment, that are the hand-to-mouth type builders, because they're not used to ordering things on the internet. They're not used to pre-ordering things. The builder I was talking to yesterday was saying that he felt, because he's always pre-ordered stuff, he won't really notice a difference once it's opened, because it's more of him doing what he's always done. But he said the builders that struggle are those smaller ones that are, pretty much, those guys that are always buying over the trade counter.
Yeah, I think I heard a similar thing about Magnet opening but a limited service, and it's true. I think across the board, whether it's in the building trade, the way people are going to be working is going to start to change, and it's going to hopefully create further efficiencies. You were mentioning about yourself, about how many times you've been to site and how you're doing stuff over Zoom, how builders are going to be ordering stock. All of this is going to force people to really think about how they transact with each other, whether they really need a retail shop or whether they, maybe I think industrial units are going to become very popular again as people start to have stock in an industrial site in a warehouse, and there's going to be changes.
Yes, and I think the interesting thing here is, without any doubt, there's going to be changes, and kind of at management level, adapting to Zoom. After you've played around with it a couple of times, you're on it.
Yeah.
A lot of tradesmen in construction are very much stuck in tradition. But this is how we've always done it. We've always built houses like this for the last 150 years. And they're going to be slower to adapt. And the builders, and almost goes back to your previous question, the builders that don't adapt to buying online, to pre-ordering for delivery and what have you, are going to be the builders that start to struggle, because they're going to be left behind. Whereas the builders that are used to buying online, telephone orders, ordering bulk materials, when the big truck turns up and everything gets crane offloaded on a HIAB, those switched on builders are probably going to get a better service, because the merchants can focus on that service, but they're going to end up leaving behind a number of less able builders.
And this is how I always end up with all the thoughts that I've got. You've always got this disruption in times like this, but that breeds great opportunity for anybody that's working hard and working smart.
Without any doubt, and not just building but consultants as well. Do we need as many visits to site? And we're managing construction projects, but interestingly, over a year ago, I was talking to a guy about virtual reality goggles, and he was saying, if we can get these goggles working, you can give those goggles to someone who's not technical, send them to the project at a non-technical hourly rate, effectively, with me, the technical person, just coming online to discuss the technical elements in a 30-minute conversation, which suddenly excludes an hour of driving each end or whatever.
I think this is
that technology was bubbling around in the background, but now stuff like that is going to accelerate.
Absolutely. Well, Martin, it's been amazing speaking with you. Before we do wrap up, we're going to be doing this again at some point together, maybe 6 to 12 months down the line, when we see how this all kind of played out, where we've ended up with technology, this, that, and the other. You do have a book and some events that you do as well, if people wanted to reach out to you.
Yes. So the website to go to is refurbishmentmasterclass.co.uk. On there's a handbook, which is kind of entry level, get to know a lot more about construction. So that's really great for anyone who's new to construction. It's written in English for people that speak English rather than written in builder speak and technology type stuff. So that's really entry level. There's some on that same website. There's some online training courses. We're planning in a couple of weeks' time to do a virtual training course, actually. So it'll be done over Zoom, kind of, just as we know things are starting to open up again. And again, this is another interesting thing. We've been doing training courses in room. Maybe we don't need to do in-room training courses any longer. Maybe they are all going to go onto Zoom. And of course, as a result, it doesn't matter if we've got less people. We don't need to fill a whole room with people. We can kind of run them more frequently. We can tailor them a lot more. So watch this space. There's a lot of things coming out on that side of the business. But of course, there's also still the stuff, managing real life projects, which is the other half of the business. So part of the business is training and mentoring. The other part of the business is consultancy and management. Which is great. And the online trend for all of these things is never been more prominent. So it's good to see that you've been able to be agile and pivot and adapt and continue that trend, which is great. So thank you so much. One last thing as well, it is your birthday today. Happy birthday! Yes, thank you very much for pointing that out. Happy birthday, Martin. Happy birthday to you. I hope you have an absolutely amazing day. Thank you very much for joining us and sharing your wisdom. We'll speak again soon. Absolutely, been great speaking to you, Sam. Catch up soon. Cheers. Take care. All the best.